Before we get into this week's episode, it's time to start spreading the news, brought to you by the official sponsor for this video, Dimension 20.
They've returned with The Unsleeping City, Season 3 of their D&D live play.
Brennan, the Dungeon Master, has rewritten the history of New York City to include a dark, magical world and gathered veteran college humor comedians to explore its mysterious underbelly filled with more secrets than we know.
It's a great example of how to adapt D&D 5e rules into a modern setting, and I'm actually surprised they didn't use more homebrew.
Yeah, Brennan really immerses the world by introducing each character with their own mini adventure during the first session. It's really cool, but it's something I'd do differently at my own game table. I've been immensely entertained by the show so far, and I've even cribbed some notes of my own for creating an immersive atmosphere and hilariously engaging player characters. You can watch the full series and much more at dropout.tv. You can even get 50% off your subscription if you sign up by following the links below.
Both episodes are available right now on their YouTube channel. Follow the links down below to learn more, and now onto this week's episode.
Through the streets of a ruined city, a pack of gnolls pursue a lone man, cornering him down a darkened alley. They smile to each other, laugh in their hyena-like voices. They have their quarry now.
The figure turns to face the gnolls and smirks as he raises a hand and snaps a finger, causing a shroud of darkness to envelop him. As the beasts turn to each other confused, beams of shadowy energy fire forth from the darkness, causing three of them to collapse dead to the ground. The last remaining gnoll stands there, horrified by the massacre around him, as a low growl erupts from the darkness, and leaping forth, a shadowy hound drags the final monster to his doom. Stepping out of the darkness is the Shadow Sorcerer.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we discuss everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos every Thursday, so please subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
This is our in-depth guide to the Shadow Sorcerer subclass in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You're going to need a copy of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which introduced the subclass to the game, as well as the Player's Handbook to follow along with us today.
We're going to be taking a look at their abilities, class features, as well as spells, metamagic, feats, and races that work best for your Shadow Sorcerer.
There's a lot to cover to find our way in the Shadowfell, so let's get rolling. Shadow Sorcerers are born from the fell energies that originate in the extraplanar realm known as the Shadowfell, a dark mirror of the material plane through which the energies of the night, death, negative energy, and cold find true power.
If you're looking at the Shadow Sorcerer, there's a chance that you're interested in playing a character that is a little dark and brooding and a little edgy.
There are many sources of magic and bloodlines that can bind your characters to the shadow. Deities such as the Raven Queen, or terrible entities such as Orcus, the Demon Prince of Undeath, Vecna, or other Lich Lords that hold power over the energies of death and shadow may be a distant ancestor of your Shadow Sorcerer. You might bear the terrible curses of creatures like the Shatter Kai or the Demon Queen Lolth.
Playing a Shadow Sorcerer means you get to really embody the shadowy energies that come from this source of magic. Being able to describe your spells with a little bit more darkness to them and coming up with new ideas on how these spells look and feel based on the character you're playing.
Beyond these great role-playing reasons, there are many fantastic mechanical reasons why it's a lot of fun to play a Shadow Sorcerer.
The abilities of the Shadow Sorcerer are just really well placed in this kind of darker, macabre sort of attitude that he has. And being able to play around with these is a lot of fun in-game.
The Shadow Sorcerer really bridges the difference between the wild magic sorcerer with its unpredictable and untamed energies and the Dragon Sorcerer, which has a very elemental theme, as well as other subclasses like the Storm Sorcerer and the Divine Soul, which associate your characters with a very strong theme that might not be what you're interested in. If you are interested in more of the dark, demonic, edgier sort of themes to connect your character to, the Shadow Sorcerer is the perfect subclass for you, And the powers of the subclass reflect on that really, really nicely, getting some of the most unique abilities and interesting ways to use the sorcerer's metamagic and sorcery points on top of their spell selection as well.
The Shadow Sorcerer really opens up this door for the Sorcerer class that allows you to take a look at a more subtle and sneaky version of the Sorcerer, who relies a little bit on stealth and the shadows to get around, as well as being able to use things like illusion magic that really feel at home with this subclass.
So the sorcerer itself can fill many different party roles, but when we're choosing the shadow sorcerer specifically, how does that bear out what we can do with our sorcerer in combat, exploration, and social interaction, Kelly?
The one thing that the Shadow Sorcerer has in terms of combat is a lot of control over darkness. They gain things like the darkness ability. A lot of their really cool traits that they pick up along the way involve being able to enhance their chances of hitting with spells and being able to survive death, which actually makes them a little bit hardier than some of the other sorcerer classes because they can get up from the brinks of death.
I agree. I think that the Shadow Sorcerer is one of the strongest picks for a player that's interested in playing a sorcerer, but is interested in subtle forms of battlefield control magic, as well as manipulating the environment and particularly darkness.
I do think that a Shadow Sorcerer is going to be right at home in missions that rely on subtlety and stealth because of their ability to control the shadows and get the drop on their enemies by using darkness to their advantage.
In exploration and infiltration scenarios, the Shadow Sorcerer's natural ability to work well in the darkness, to increase the darkness around them, combined with a really smart spell selection, means that you can really be this utility caster that is helping your party get into dangerous environments, use the cover of darkness to get in and get out, especially if you're going to expand that with illusion magic and spells like Dimension Door and Invisibility. You can really be this excellent utility caster as well, with a very limited subset behind that abilities, because sorcerers are always limited in that way. As a charisma-based spellcasting class, you're going to be really good at persuasion, deception, or intimidation. Whatever skill set that you want to choose, you're going to have the ability scores and the proficiency to match.
And that's really going to speak to the way you want to role play the sorcerer. With a Shadow Sorcerer, I do feel that if you are going for that brooding attitude, you might be leaning more towards deception and intimidation, but you might be a straight up charmer who just happens to be an emo kid.
Yeah, you might be the nightmare. You might be the thing that haunts the darkness and creates nightmares in your enemies. You could be a very subtle manipulator. So I think that there's very different ways that you can take your character's role-playing direction depending on how they identify with the stuff of shadows, and especially the broader theme of the night, sleep, darkness, and dreams are all really fertile ground for thinking about your character's identity if you're going to play as a Shadow Sorcerer. So, in summary, what would you say are the biggest strengths of the Shadow Sorcerer?
The strengths of the Shadow Sorcerer are really their ability to control darkness, to have that darkness spell that they can see through, their ability to just be that charisma-based spellcaster also gives them really good social avenues to be the face of the party, as well as a blaster or a battlefield controller. They can really fill several different roles in the party, and that is a strength that you can build a Shadow Sorcerer to really fit in where you need them to be.
I think that the Shadow Sorcerer runs into a really big problem with the Sorcerer class as a whole, which is there's so much that you want to be good at, but you are really limited in your spell selection, and you are really limited in your sorcery points. And you're going to be tempted by a lot of those blaster spells, which really aren't the strength of the Shadow Sorcerer. I think that their strength is in the darkness and in their control and utility abilities. And as soon as you want to have a smorgasbord of blaster spells, in addition to all that utility magic, you suddenly start looking at the limited number of spells that a sorcerer knows and be like, oh, maybe I should just play a wizard instead. So it's a really tough call in that respect.
Shots fired. I do think that it is nice to have a few blasty spells, speaking from experience, but the Shadow Sorcerer does have those limits, and I do find that from experience, I am thirsty for sorcery points in almost every game. And the games where I do feel like I was the biggest badass on the battlefield, I usually am going into the next combat with almost nothing.
The last thing that I'll point out is that the Shadow Sorcerer suffers from the same thing that Warlocks have and other classes that really like hanging out in the darkness. And that is when your allies can't see in the dark. And because the Shadow Sorcerer is able to conjure areas of darkness that they can see in, but it's magical darkness, so unless you got a Warlock as a sidekick, you don't have anybody else that can see in that. And that can be a party dynamic problem. It's a strong ability, but how your other party members deal with the darkness can really impact how potent your abilities end up being.
I do notice that the further I get into the campaign, the less I'm using my darkness, because if we're in small spaces, darkness just hinders the party
Yep,
rather
the
than
human
help.
fighter can't see in that darkness. Sorcerers are an outlier. They are one of the few classes in the game that select their subclass right away at first level because it's their sorceress origin. And in the case of the Shadow Sorcerer, you gain 2 abilities right off the bat: Eyes of the Dark and Strength of the Grave.
Eyes of the Dark allow you to gain dark vision out to 120 feet, which is great, especially if you're playing a race that doesn't already have dark vision. On top of that, you can use 2 sorcery points to cast the darkness spell and allow yourself to be able to see within that magical darkness.
That ability is a little bit of an outlier, again, because that doesn't come online right away at first level. You have to wait till 3rd level to be able to get that. And you get a bonus spell known, so the darkness spell doesn't count against your spells known.
It is a good battlefield control or defensive maneuver to be able to have on the battlefield. To just shroud yourself in darkness that only you can see through does give you an edge in combat.
The Strength of the Grave ability allows you to make a charisma saving throw whenever you take damage that would reduce you to 0 hit points. If you succeed on the saving throw, which has a DC of 5 plus the damage taken, you stay up at a single hit point, but then you can't use that ability again until you take a long rest. This will literally save your life.
Yeah, depending on how hard you get hit, that is the one thing that I do notice about this ability. It is very, very useful, and it's good to always have that chance. But as you increase in levels, that chance is going to get lower and lower for you to be able to get back up.
And the other diminishing thing is it won't save you from a critical hit or radiant damage.
If you take more than 20 damage on a hit, your chances of being able to get back up if you're reduced to 0 on that hit are really minimal.
Yeah, if you eat a Great Axe attack from a Frost Giant that deals 25 points of damage, you have to make a DC 30 Charisma saving throw, which even with your proficiency and a high Charisma modifier, your chances of making that, even as a very high level character, are low.
So it does work really well if you're dropped by minions. So really, I would say that this ability saves you from embarrassing deaths.
I think the most potent and amazing ability is the Hound of Ill Omen, which you get at level 6.
Literally the reason I chose this class was because I loved the idea of having a shadowy hound that I could summon that would single out a target, chase them down, attack them, and give me a bonus on being able to hit them with a spell.
So the Hound of Ill Omen has many different disclaimers and exceptions, but the basic idea here is that you're going to use your bonus action on your turn to summon the Hound within 30 feet of a target that you sick it against. The Hound that is summoned is a monstrosity, not a beast. It's medium-sized, not large, and it uses the same stats as the Direwolf from the Monster Manual. It also gets a few extra cool abilities like temporary hit points and the really fantastic ability that if you cast a spell against the quarry of the Hound and it's within 5 feet of that target then gets disadvantage on its saving throw, which is incredible.
So pairing this with a good mix of spells that require saving throws that you can use in conjunction with the Hound is key to a good Shadow Sorcerer.
I think so. The thing to bear in mind with this is that this ability is about on par with the Sorcerer's heightened spell Metamagic. It costs the same amount of sorcery points to do it, but with the Hound of Ill Omen, as long as the Hound is there, every spell you cast against that target is going to benefit from that disadvantage to its saving throw. So you're getting more bang for your buck if you're hitting a big boss with multiple spells that require saving throws.
Also keep in mind that the other benefit is that your Hound gets to attack every turn, so you're piling on more damage, and the Hound has pack tactics, so if you have an ally that's also up front fighting that same target, you now have advantage on the Hound's attacks as well.
And the Hound can then pull the target prone and really be that extra ally on the battlefield. The impact of a summoned creature on combat is so massive, and this is just such a subtle ability. It's like getting a much more powerful spell. And the fact that it is not a spell, so you summon it as a bonus action and you can still cast a leveled spell, makes it just phenomenal. The only downside to the Hound is that once the target dies or 5 minutes pass, it goes away. So you can't sick the Hound against another target over the course of the same combat encounter. So it really is something you use against the priority target or the boss monster.
It's also why you don't always bust this Hound out in every single combat encounter. I usually reserve it for if there is a main target or a big target that you need to take out. That is when the Hound comes into play. Otherwise, sicking it on a minion and then having that minion die after one round and the Hound goes away seems like a bad use of 3 sorcery points.
From there, the Shadow Sorcerer does not gain any new abilities till level 14, when they get the fantastic Shadow Walk ability that allows them to teleport between areas of shadow as a bonus action up to 120 feet. This is just great.
It's basically free teleportation. You don't need a teleportation spell. As long as there's shadows around, you can teleport.
Yeah, create your own area of darkness and teleport to and from it. The key thing here about the Shadow Sorcerer is that unlike the Shadow Monk, who can't see in their own magical darkness, the Shadow Sorcerer can. So if you're in an area of dim light or darkness, and you want to teleport somewhere where there is not currently dim light or darkness, you can create it with the darkness spell and teleport there. Or if you're in an area of light, you cast darkness on yourself and then use that to teleport into the darkness as well. So you actually have your own cool little built-in escape tool right here.
That is really handy, and for some reason I hadn't really considered the use of the shadow spell in conjunction with the shadow walk.
Yeah.
Which is just a really potent combination that can really save your life or help just get into or out of places.
Yeah, it kind of steps on the toes of Dimension Door. Although Dimension Door, I think, is still a much more flexible and powerful spell because it's not contingent on line of sight. But it does mean that, you might as well not take Misty Step as a high-level Shadow Sorcerer.
At 18th level, you gain Umbral Form, which makes you turn into a shadow that is resistant to all damage except Radiant and Force.
You can also walk through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain. This ability costs 6 sorcery points to activate, and it only lasts for 1 minute. It's a great high-level ability. I think 6 sorcery points is a pretty high cost to activate it. I wish it would have been a passive ability like Sprouting Wings.
I can see this as the, oh my gosh, I need to get out of here and I have 6 sorcery points left ability, or the, we're planning an infiltration and we're going to get into this place, and who's our stealth operator, the guy that can walk through walls and become a shadow. It could be very useful, but I don't see me wanting to use that if I know I'm going into a big combat or something.
It could be very useful as an ability that you got 10 levels earlier and didn't come online at 18th level as an 18th level sorcerer, because by this level you have 9th level spells and wish, so you already have had the ability to have resistance to all damage, and you can probably cast spells like wish and teleport yourself around. I don't think that for the cost of 6 sorcery points, it's what I would pay. There's a lot of things that you can do with 6 sorcery points as an 18th level sorcerer, like twinning a 6th level spell, which I think is going to do a lot more than this.
That's fair.
I think it's a pretty disappointing high level ability. All the abilities of the Shadow Sorcerer are on the table. How are we going to build this character? And it starts off with a key question. What are your ability scores going to be?
Charisma is
Yeah.
your number 1. It's got to be.
Yeah.
Constitution is my number 2. And then after that, I kind of usually go with either dexterity or wisdom, which is really for the skills that I want to use, or the saving throw that I want to be better at.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you were doing a point by character, I put my 15 in charisma, max that out right away. And then I would probably be really tempted to put a 15 in constitution or dexterity, and then let the rest fall out from there. I think I want to have at least 14 in both my dexterity and constitution. And then the other points I'm going to allocate based on how I want to roleplay the character's mental stats. There's a case that you could make a sorcerer that completely dumps their strength, wisdom, and intelligence, and just does that whole thing where you have 8 strength, 8 intelligence, 8 wisdom, and then 15 in the other 3 stats. It's really tempting to do that.
That character's going to be so dumb.
I know, I don't think I
No
would do that.
wisdom, no intelligence. They're
No,
like just a walking, angry, brooding jerk.
Yeah, and I think too, as a shadow sorcerer, you want to have some intelligence and wisdom behind you because you want to be able to fully take advantage of your social skills, and you want to be able to take advantage of the fact that in stealth environments, the last thing in the world you want is to be mucking around in the dark and then fail a perception check. So I think that at least putting a 10 or 12 in your intelligence and wisdom is a pretty good idea. I don't know if I would go much higher than that unless I rolled the stats and rolled really well.
So we're looking at the Shadow Sorcerer. What races are going to work best for this subclass?
So I think that there are a few natural fits for the Shadow Sorcerer, depending on how edgy you want to be. Because the Sorcerer really attracts the people of kind of the peripheral races, those that are the outcasts, those that are the destitute, those that are the half-breeds. And so half-elves and tieflings, Shadar-kai, and dark elves are all fantastic shadow sorcerers. I think you end up with a pretty edgy character if you're playing a dark elf or a tiefling shadow sorcerer, but I think, you just lean into the tropes with that one.
Crank that emo nub up to 12.
Yeah. And mechanically, I think they're all fantastic as well.
I now want to play a drow sorcerer with a swoopy haircut who people just don't understand him. That's my joke.
No one understands the darkness in my soul. I think this is one of the few cases where the variant human is not the clear winner. And if you're playing a variant human, you're not playing a half elf or a dark elf, which means you can't take elven accuracy, which is another awesome feat for a shadow sorcerer because you're going to have advantage a lot on your attacks.
And those are really the 2 biggest feats for me if we're talking about building a shadow sorcerer is take the half elf so you can get elven accuracy, because combining elven accuracy with the ability to see in your own darkness spell is a great 1-2 combo.
Yeah.
So you cast darkness on yourself and now you have super advantage on all of your attacks. So if you build this character that has that Hound of Ill Omen with a few spells that require saves, and then you have some spells that are direct hits with elven accuracy and darkness, you now have the ability to gain benefits to all of your spell casting.
Would you say you're taking advantage of the cover of darkness very well?
I would say that, Monty.
Yeah, you are. You're getting advantage and disadvantage all over the place. You might take Skulker as another feat, which could be pretty interesting. Because you're probably going to have a smorgasbord of spells, other sorcerer staples like Elemental Adept might not be what you're going for as a shadow sorcerer. I think you're going to be really diverse with your damage types, so Elemental Adept isn't going to give you the advantage that it would with other sorcerers.
So let's talk about some of the skills and backgrounds that might work best for our shadow sorcerer.
Yeah, I think a shadow sorcerer naturally falls into the criminal, charlatan, bounty hunter sort of backgrounds. Again, they're coming from the shadowy place, and having skills that support stealth, deception, proficiency in thieves' tools, maybe even sleight of hand, are all really going to augment your natural spellcasting.
Really, the background is going to depend on how you want to play that shadowy character.
I think for me, the essential skills to pick up as a shadow sorcerer are stealth, perception, and deception, and then maybe intimidation or persuasion, if you want them.
Yeah, I fully agree. Stealth is going to be so important, especially since you are that character that plays around in the shadows. That is your thing. So that is really important. I picked up all 3 of the social skills because for me, if I have a character that has such high charisma, why not benefit in all social situations? No matter what the DM asks me to roll to pass a argument or a discussion of some kind, I have the tools to get past it. So if you want to be the face of the party, if you want to be the talker, you can just pick up any of those social skills.
Now that's where playing the human might come into play, because you could take the prodigy feat and get expertise in something like stealth or persuasion or deception. And that's the one thing where the bard kind of has the game occupied with the stealth and social skills. But if you wanted to give the bard a run for their money as a shadow sorcerer.
You play
That
the
could
human.
be, yeah, you could. So to summarize, I think with the shadow sorcerer, with the unique skills and ability scores and feats, I'm probably going to max out my charisma as soon as possible, get proficiency in stealth, perception, and deception, and once my charisma score is maxed out, I'll probably then start looking at feats like Warcaster and Lucky and Skulker.
That sounds about right to me. Again, I would take Elven Accuracy if you're playing a half-elf, or I might even take Prodigy if you're playing a human.
As a half elf, you might have an odd charisma score as you start to level up, so that's where you can squeak in Elven Accuracy.
Because it does give you the +1.
Yeah. So now getting into the meat of the class, Metamagic and spells. So first off, we've talked about how the Metamagic is very, very restrictive for sorcerers. And in fact, we have a whole guide to Metamagic options for sorcerers. So Kelly, when you picked your Metamagic options as your Shadow Sorcerer, what did you go for?
I went with Quicken Spell and Empowered Spell.
Why did you take those two?
I took those two because originally I was imagining a more blasty character, and so Quicken Spell gave me tools to use both a blasty spell and maybe a utility cantrip or something like that. Being able to do certain tasks at the same time as using spells, and then Empowered was just fun for upping a fireball or another blasty spell, being able to say, oh no, I rolled too many ones, let's redo that.
So I disagree with you. I think that as a Shadow Sorcerer, you gotta have Subtle Spell. I think it's a mistake not to take it, personally.
You know what, Monty? I disagree with me too, and I wish I had taken Subtle Spell.
Take Subtle Spell as a Shadow Sorcerer and don't look back. I think that it is such a huge enabler for the stealth gameplay, for everything the Shadow Sorcerer wants to do. I think it is the #1 pick for them. And then I personally would be really tempted to take Twin Spell, because I think that there's a lot of really good options that you can take with support magic and utility magic that you're going to get a lot of mileage out of it. Although I don't think Quicken Spell is a bad choice at all. I think that you could make the case either way depending on how your spell selection is going to.
Quicken Spell is never a bad choice. It just comes up less with the play style I think the Shadow Sorcerer speaks to than it would with certain other subclasses.
The thing is, though, as the Shadow Sorcerer, you're going to be spending so many sorcery points on Eyes of the Dark and the Hound of Ill Omen. So taking an economical metamagic choice like Subtle Spell or Empowered Spell or even Quicken Spell, which is only ever 2 sorcery points, is a really good choice because Twin Spell is really expensive. It uses up more sorcery points than basically any other metamagic option. And so I would definitely take it by level 10. You definitely want Quicken and Twin, but I think Subtle is the way to go.
So now that we've talked about the Metamagic, why don't we discuss what spells we might take for our Shadow Sorcerer? I mean, there's always going to be good spells for all spellcasters, but what really speaks to the Shadow Sorcerer?
Well, you got such a limited choice, so I've really tried to narrow mine down because it's so easy to list all of the spells that a sorcerer can possibly take, but we can never get around the fact that the sorcerer is only ever going to get 15. And at any given level of play, you're going to be really limited by your choices. For cantrips, I'm going to take Minor Illusion, Mage Hand, and Prestidigitation 100% of the time. And then I would probably take Chill Touch and Ray of Frost.
The only thing that you have that's different than mine is I took Firebolt instead of Ray of Frost. And I don't have Prestidigitation, I have Mold Earth. That more came from a place where I wanted to try Mold Earth out. But it has been useful. I do feel like the illusion sort of spells, the Mage Hand and the Minor Illusion, really kind of can speak to a Shadow Sorcerer's abilities. I think that's really cool, and Chill Touch just seems on point.
Yeah, it feels thematic. As we get into first level spells, what were your top 2 picks for first level spells?
So, first of all, I think that we need a defensive spell, and I love Shield. I think that Shield works really well with a sorcerer because they're a squishy character, and being able to have that +5 to AC in a pinch can be really helpful, and actually using a spell slot to not take a massive amount of damage is endlessly helpful.
See, I disagree with you. I think I would take Mage Armor over Shield if I only had to pick one. I think that having +3 AC all the time is better than having +5 for 1 or 2 big hits.
The other spell I took was Burning Hands because I do believe that you do want some way to damage the enemies. Depending on your party dynamic, if you have a lot of people that are doing damage, this might change. But for me, I always like having something to back myself up with. However, this is not a long-term spell. I did end up switching out
Yeah.
Burning Hands later.
I think I would pick up Sleep right away, and I would then retrain that for something like Disguise Self.
I actually love the idea of Disguise Self because you are a charisma-based spellcaster. Mixing the deception with the Disguise Self is really good.
That's going to be the recurring theme in my spell choices. I'm going for the absolute Enchanter Illusionist in my spell choices.
That's fair.
Yeah.
For second level, I picked Web and Scorching Ray. Again, picking one that I felt was like really thematic of a Shadow Sorcerer. I love the Web, but then I love blasting.
I went totally different from you again. I chose Phantasmal Force, Invisibility, and Suggestion. Those are my top 3 for second level Shadow Sorcerer spells. First of all 3 of them are really cool twinned.
Okay.
Because twin invisibility at third level is super useful. Turning 2 party members invisible for an infiltration, great way to set up a fight. Phantasmal Force is a problematic spell. We've talked about this before. And so if your DM is going to give you problems about how it works, if you have disagreements with your dungeon master over how to interpret this spell, you might not want to take it, but it's really cool when you can twin it.
You know, that sounds all great, but I can't help but discuss how great Web is at pinning down enemies and impacting the battlefield to help out all of your allies.
But I mean, Suggestion, a twin Suggestion could stop a fight from even happening. A subtle Suggestion can really go far. That's like a mind worm right there.
My spell choices for third level were Hypnotic Pattern, Counterspell, and Fireball.
I completely agree with you on all 3 of those. I think Hypnotic Pattern is pretty unbeatable, and for me, it fits my illusionist theme. I think that Counterspell is absolutely essential, although if you have someone else in your party that can cast it, you might want to not take it.
I keep talking about how it's good to have a few blasty spells. At the end of the day, if you take Fireball, you're probably good in the blasty department.
Now, for my very purist illusionist Shadow Sorcerer, I'm not going to take Fireball. I'm going to take Major Image. Because I want the ultimate illusion spell. It is the Swiss Army knife of illusions. It gets around all the other problems with all the other illusion spells because you can concentrate on it. You can cast it as a 6th level spell, and then you don't have to concentrate on it. And it has an indefinite duration. Or you can manipulate it, change it. It's very, very large. If you've got the creativity and you've got a DM who embraces that creativity, Major Image might be the last spell you ever need to cast.
So when we look at 4th level spells, I went with Polymorph and Wall of Fire, but I bet you're going to have some different spells to look at.
Not on the polymorph front.
That's fair.
It's best spell in the game. I don't know how you can not take it.
I stand by the fact that if you have access to Polymorph, you take Polymorph.
Yeah. I took Dimension Door. I think I seem to recall that you took Thunderstep with
I
your
did
Shadow
take
Sorcerer.
Thunderstep.
Yeah. I took Dimension Door. I think that there's actually less standout 4th level spells for sorcerers and actually across most classes. So I'm happy with just having Polymorph and Dimension Door. I think that those 2 spells alone give me everything I need for my sorcerer.
One that does seem pretty on point with the theme of a Shadow Sorcerer is Sickening Radiance.
Yes. So you've got Shadow and Light and Beware the Light as well.
It's not either of our favorite spell, but it is one that if you are really trying to hone in on what feels Shadow Sorcery, that one kind of speaks to me.
So as we come to 5th level spells, I am fighting my urge to take Animate Objects, and I'm going to take Seeming, Synaptic Static, and Telekinesis as my 5th level picks.
I am taking Animate Objects, and you're not going to stop me.
Yeah.
But that's more me talking about my favorite spells. I feel like if we're talking about the Shadow Sorcerer, Synaptic Static is almost like it does seem like
It's
it fits.
pretty on point for like the whole illusion enchanter. Like that to me, I'm taking Synaptic Static as my damage dealing spell because I felt my third level spells were really crowded with my control spells. Like I'm going to be using Counterspell, Major Image, and Hypnotic Pattern a lot. So I kind of inverted the purpose of my fifth and third level spells, where I took the damage dealing spells for my fifth level spells and the control spells for my third level spells.
Would you drop Fireball for Synaptic Static?
Yeah, I think that I would let Fireball stay off the list because chances are I'm going to be casting Hypnotic Pattern and Counterspell using my third level spells. So as we get into the very high level spells, our 6th, 7th, and 8th level spells, these are where the decisions get really, really tight for the Sorcerer because really you can only afford to pick one spell of each level, so you gotta make it a good one. I picked for my 6th level spells either Mental Prison or Mass Suggestion.
Both seem on point with a Shadow Sorcerer. I love Mental Prison. The description of Mental Prison describes that possibly you're surrounding the enemy with like fangs and darkness, and I think that feels super on point with just trapping an enemy in evil darkness.
And Mental Prison is a great option for twin spell. Yeah, especially. I really like the idea of twinning Mental Prison. 7th and 8th level spells for the Sorcerer really disappoint me. I'm not impressed with any of them, and I think that the only ones that I would really be interested in taking here would be Teleport, Plane Shift, and maybe Power Word Stun. But everything else kind of makes me go, I don't care too much.
Yeah, honestly, I agree. There's not a whole lot out there, and when you get to those high level spells, I still feel like I'm relying on the spells that I took earlier in the game, and these are just kind of ones that are there in case I need them.
And when we get to the 9th level spells, I think you've only got one option. Really, one must have, which is Wish.
Meteor Swarm. Wish.
You got to take Wish because it's going to give you access to everything else along the way that you didn't have until now. And you're probably going to be using Wish to cast lower level wizard spells like Contingency and Simulacrum because you didn't get those leveling up.
But at the same time, if we're talking about the theme of a Shadow Sorcerer, do you think Wish feels appropriate? Or is that you pulling the wishes out of the Shadowfell?
It is making the stuff of dreams become real.
Okay, fair enough. I think Psychic Scream sounds also on point with a Shadow Sorcerer. It's
does.
not usually my pick for a 9th level, but...
We have the great advantage here is that Kelly has now played 35 sessions plus as a Shadow Sorcerer in our Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign. So Kelly, what are your go-to strategies? What have been the most effective things that you have found as your Sorcerer?
So when I'm playing my Shadow Sorcerer, I really like the use of the Darkness spell that I can see through, and combined with some of my Blasty spells that will give me advantage on my attacks, as well as also combining the Hound of Ill Omen with some of my more interesting spells like Hypnotic Pattern or Polymorph that require a saving throw to give that enemy disadvantage on that save.
So you try to assess at the start of combat whether this is going to be a combat that you're going to rely on Darkness and Blasting for, or the Hound of Ill Omen and Concentration for.
Those are my two go-to strategies. And yeah, if there's a big boss, I usually do the Hound of Ill Omen. If there's a bunch of minions, I'll do the Darkness and Blasty.
I think that the Shadow Sorcerer does really, really well teaming up with other characters like Rogues, Warlocks, Gloomstalker Rangers, Shadow Monks, and other characters that are at home in the shadows and working together stealthily and intelligently. And I think that in a party that was very interested in long-term planning, I think the Shadow Sorcerer as an illusionist could really rock it. Being able to sneak forward with the Rogue, with the Gloomstalker Ranger, to help them set up an ambush. Like, imagine a Shadow Sorcerer supporting an Assassin Rogue and a Gloomstalker Ranger, and what that could do. Especially if you were then using illusion magic to conceal that approach and to help those two characters to get away.
It might work much better than when you have a giant Battlemaster fighter clunking around beside you.
Yeah, it might work a lot better.
So we've created a Shadow Sorcerer that you can check out in the links below at 5th, 9th, and 13th level. Also, you can check out my Shadow Sorcerer, Sebastian Crow, that we play in the Dungeons of Drakkenheim in the links below. So this has been a look at the Shadow Sorcerer in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've made an awesome Shadow Sorcerer that you want to tell us about, let us know in the comments below.
If you're enjoying the channel and want to help support our work, please consider checking us out on Patreon. You can find out how you can support us by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see me playing a Shadow Sorcerer, you can check out our live play Dungeons of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes on a playlist right up over here.
And we have plenty more guides to the classes and subclasses of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.